Welcome back to Global Perspectives. This is Episode 6, How the UN Protects Rogue Nations and Terrorists. Part 1, The Jenin Operations Preventing Another October 7th. I'm Andrea McGurran with KHTY TV and News, and tonight we're exposing the truth about the UN's complicity with terror groups globally. As the IDF continues conducting one of its largest counterterrorism operations in years in the West Bank, a region annexed by Jordan in the 1950s, this over 7-month-old operation has uncovered clear evidence of Hamas, Fatah, the PLO, and other Islamist groups operating within Israel's borders jointly, with plans for a second October 7 attack being developed in the heart of Judea and Samaria. But the UN continues its support of these groups and the regimes that fund, train, and harbor them. This isn't just about terror groups versus Israel. This is about the future of a dangerous movement with proven skills in deceiving the West and the world on the world stage, taking what they want and infiltrating without any alarms sounding off. It's about the threat to all the countries that gave safe haven to millions and how Western nations and peoples are being duped into an invented historical narrative that is assisting these terrorists and its supporters to expand their control. The October 7 attacks were just the beginning. Join us now for Global Perspectives, Episode 6, How the UN Protects Rogue Nations and Terrorists. Part 1, Inside Jenin, the Terror Factory the World Ignores. Welcome back. I'm Andrea McGurran with KHTY TV and News. This is Global Perspectives. And tonight we begin a multi-part investigation that will shock you to your core. What you're about to see and hear represents one of the most comprehensive exposés of international terrorism and institutional complicity ever assembled. This isn't about politics. This isn't about taking sides. This is about documented evidence, eyewitness accounts, and the words of terrorists themselves captured when they thought the world wasn't listening. Before we begin, I want to warn you. What you're about to hear will disturb you. The evidence we present today comes directly from military operations, intercepted communications, and on-the-ground reporting from one of the most dangerous places on Earth. If you value truth over comfortable lies, if you believe the world needs to know what's really happening in the shadows of international diplomacy, then please like, subscribe, and most importantly, share this episode with everyone you know, because the truth we're about to reveal has been systematically hidden from you by the very institutions supposed to protect global peace and security. It was a crisp morning when an IDF battalion command entered Jenin with military vehicles carrying hundreds of soldiers, heavy equipment, and at least one journalist brave enough to document what they would find. The ride was bumpy and long, threading through rough roads that had been deliberately damaged to slow any military approach. As they crested the hill overlooking the Jenin refugee camp, within a throw's distance of the main city and the Jesuit Valley, spread below them, none of the soldiers could have anticipated the scope of what they were about to uncover. Heavy machinery had been working for days to capture huge caches of weaponry. Inside the camp, surrounded by rough roads and dusty houses, some reduced to rubble, they began their systematic search with military precision. According to the IDF representative at the time, and I quote, "What we're seeing here isn't random violence or isolated incidents. This is industrial-scale terrorism infrastructure. Every building, every basement, every street corner has been weaponized." But nothing could have prepared them for what they found beneath the camp's central mosque. The mosque stood at the heart of the refugee camp, its minaret rising above the maze of concrete buildings and narrow alleyways. For decades, it had served as a place of worship for the camp's residents, or so the world believed. What the IDF discovered when they entered would redefine our understanding of how terrorist organizations operate and how religious institutions can be perverted for the most evil purposes. According to an IDF soldier, and this is, please note, coming from actual recordings and documented, confirmed, and verified footage, and I quote, "When we opened the door to what should have been the main prayer hall, we couldn't believe what we were seeing. The entire floor was covered, and I mean covered, with AK-47 shell casings. Hundreds of them, maybe thousands. The mosque had been transformed into a firing range. Not occasionally, not secretly. This had been happening openly, regularly, systematically." And if you check the links that I'll give you below, you can actually look at the actual film footage and see the proof. This isn't my opinion. This isn't my media outtake. This is real. This is only the truth. Another IDF Engineering Corps officer was quoted, "The walls, every single wall, was riddled with bullets. Some of those holes were so large you could see clear through to the outside. Windows completely destroyed by sustained gunfire from the inside out. This wasn't target practice. This was military training." So think about it for a moment. A place of worship, a sacred place in Islamic tradition, had been converted into a terrorist training facility. Young militants, some barely teenagers, had been brought here to learn how to kill. And I've seen the film footage, and you can see huge holes in certain places in the walls, windows full of holes, windows disappeared. This wasn't something that could have been hidden. This isn't something the locals would have just not heard. This wasn't deep underground like in Gaza. This was above ground. It was heard. There's no doubt. Now, a local resident whose identity has been protected, speaking through a translator, and I quote, "Everyone knew what was happening in that mosque, the sound of gunfire day and night, the smell of gunpowder during prayer times, but no one dared speak against it. If you questioned the fighters, you disappeared." So I note, question them, you disappear. So the mosque was just the beginning. As the IDF forces methodically cleared the camp over the following days and weeks, a terrifying picture emerged of industrial-scale terrorism infrastructure. Another IDF officer was quoted to say, "This wasn't some underground cell operating in secret. This was an entire community, men, women, teenagers, all working together to manufacture weapons and explosives on an industrial scale. Over the past 7 months of operations, the IDF Engineering Corps has removed approximately 1,000 improvised explosive devices, IEDs as they're called, from the camp streets alone. 1,000 in a refugee camp supposedly protected by international law and overseen by UN agencies. And this isn't your average refugee camp full of tents. This is an infrastructure of buildings and homes well established. The IDF explosive expert was quoted to say, "We're not talking about crude, homemade bombs. These were sophisticated devices designed to maximize casualties. The level of engineering knowledge required. This is a military-grade expertise being passed down through generations." And I repeat that, passed down through generations. With between 10,000 and 12,000 refugees in the camp, the crafting of terrorism and its tools had become as common as baking bread. The IDF commander was also quoted to say, In civilian populations, you might find one or two individuals involved in illegal weapons. Here, entire families were participating in weapons manufacturing. Fathers teaching sons, mothers preparing explosive materials, children as young as 12 learning to assemble detonators. But the most shocking discovery came when intelligence officers found detailed plans hidden in a basement workshop beneath a seemingly innocent residential building. The IDF intelligence analysis team was quoted to say, "What we found weren't plans for isolated attacks or small-scale operations. These comprehensive blueprints for coordinated assaults on multiple Israeli communities simultaneously. The level of detail was extraordinary." The documents revealed for what can be only described as a second October 7th attack. Maps of Israel communities, timing schedules for simultaneous strikes, lists of weapons and personal allocations. Most chilling of all, detailed instructions for handling civilians. A senior IDF officer, identity also protected, was quoted to say the cruelty, the sadism, the specific mutilation plans they had prepared. And I repeat that, mutilation plans. Did you hear me? Mutilation plans. "I've been in the military for some 20 years, he went on to say, and I've never seen anything so systemically evil. These weren't military objectives. They were genocide blueprints." The IDF press representative made the situation crystal clear to the embedded journalist. And I quote, "Had the IDF waited or not gone in at all, terror groups within Judea and Samaria, that's in Israel, were planning an attack that would have made October 7th look like a minor incident. The IDF presence alone thwarted a planned massacre that was already in its final preparation stages." As the operation continued, a complex network of terror coordination began to emerge. This wasn't just Hamas. It wasn't just one organization. An IDF counterterrorism unit was quoted to say, "We arrested 90 terror suspects in the area known as Aosh alone, including key operatives at the heart of Jenin operations." But what surprised us is how fluid the organization affiliations were. The operation uncovered coordinated efforts among multiple terror groups: Hamas, Fatah, the PLO, also known as supposedly the disbanded Palestinian Liberation Organization, Islamic Jihad, all working together with a level of cooperation that defied traditional understanding of these organizations as separate entities. Another IDF strategic analysis revealed, and I quote, "Some people might be Islamic Jihad one week, Hamas the next, PLO after that. They move and flow in and out of these different organizations in a very fluid manner. Their affiliation is more to the geography, to the clan associations they have, versus a very specific or direct link to a terrorist organization. Room after room revealed weapon caches, machine guns, M16s, M4s, pistols, improvised explosives, and cash, lots of cash, funding their activities." The IDF Financial Crimes Unit was quoted to say, "The money trail was extraordinary. Iranian funding flowing through Qatar, distributed through local clan leaders, filtered down to individual families. Every household in the camp was receiving payment for participating in terrorism infrastructure." During the most intensive phase of operations, the IDF deployed helicopters to drop reserve infantry directly into hostile areas, while armored teams sealed off escape routes. An IDF airborne commander was quoted to say, "These operations weren't about punishment or retaliation. Every raid was precisely targeted to intercept weapons and terror funds before they could be used against civilians. We were stopping attacks that were already planned, already funded, already in motion." The precision was extraordinary. The IDF forces tracked weapon movements, planned routes, and intended targets with surgical accuracy. Another IDF operations officer, again identity not being revealed, was quoted to say this mission isn't about politics, it's about preventing terrorism. It's the crucial difference between an ambush occurring or being averted. Every weapon we seize, every bomb we defuse represents lives saved. International allies understood the necessity. The United States and United Kingdom recognized Israel's right to self-defense, even as critics in the United Nations and countries like Canada mislabeled these life-saving efforts as criminal. A senior U.S. defense official, quoting from a brief, Israel is doing what any responsible nation would do when facing imminent terrorist attacks. The precision and care they've shown in these operations is remarkable. But here's where this story takes a dark turn, as if it couldn't be any darker, that exposes the international community's complicity in terror operations. An IDF intelligence assessment, and I quote, said, Hamas, Fatah, the PLO, and their terror group affiliates don't just violate all warfare, human rights, and international laws. They operate as part of the civilian population in hospitals, in schools, and most shockingly, in UN facilities. The terrorist organizations had embedded themselves so completely into the fabric of the refugee camp that distinguishing between civilians and combatants became nearly impossible. The IDF Civil Affairs, one of their officers reported, and I quote, terrorism and anti-Jewish, anti-Israel hatred is so rampant in these areas. It's been part of their lives since birth. Many residents don't know anything else, and tragically, some don't want to know anything else. Yet international observers continued to classify these areas as refugee camps, deserving of protection under international law, rather than what they had actually become, terrorist training grounds and weapons manufacturing centers. And based on my observations from what I've seen, they're like towns. There's towns and whole cities. They're not camps with tents. These are not your average refugee camps. A former UN official, speaking anonymously, and I quote, said the United Nations has been willfully blind to what these camps have become. UNRWA, UNRWA facilities are being used for weapons storage and terror training. It isn't an accident, it's systemic policy. Not everything discovered in Jenin was cause for despair. IDF forces systematically dismantled the terrorist infrastructure. Unexpected developments began to emerge. According to an IDF community liaison officer, we're seeing something interesting happening among the younger residents. Different voices are rising on social media, a trending discourse that's seeking change, demanding it. With the removal of terrorist goods and terrorism operatives, the grip of fear that had controlled the camp for decades was beginning to weaken. A social media analyst monitoring Arabic language posts, and I quote, said, young people in the camp are starting to speak out against the violence. They're posting videos asking for education opportunities, job training, normal lives. It's the first time in years we've seen this kind of discourse. But the transformation wasn't just about removing threats. It was about rebuilding hope. According to the IDF Engineering Corps, and I quote, our goal isn't to destroy this area. Our goal is to allow life to go back to normal. We're repaving roads, rebuilding infrastructure, so that when people come back, they have better conditions than they had before. The level of care taken was extraordinary. Of the over 1,500, that's 1,500 buildings in the refugee camp, the IDF had only damaged between 150 to 300 structures, and in each case, only those housing extensive terrorism infrastructure or active fighting positions. An IDF ethics officer was quoted to say, "The IDF goes to extreme efforts to make sure the only people we hurt are those who deserve it, the terrorists." This is the face of Israel in warfare. How many armies globally make such careful, painstaking efforts at such great cost to ensure they don't hurt anyone who doesn't deserve to be hurt? As we step back from the immediate tactical discoveries in Jenin, a much larger and more terrifying picture began to emerge. According to a strategic intelligence assessment, and I quote, "Jenin isn't just a refugee camp, it's a strategic gateway. This is where terrorism tries to enter into Israel, where the global proxy war of global jihad and global terrorism tries to gain a foothold inside this land." The geographical position is crucial, and note this. Close to the eastern border with Jordan, positioned along smuggling routes, attempting to bring weapons and explosives into the region, and close enough to Israeli civilian populations to launch attacks. A regional security expert was quoted to say, "This is also where Iranian cash and influence flows in, trying to indoctrinate and fund the terrorism machine through Judea and Samaria. The money, the weapons, the coordination, it all flows through here." So you see, the scope of external involvement was staggering and continues to be staggering. A counterintelligence officer was quoted to say, "We're seeing a combination of incredible external threats, Iranians, other terrorist movements, Islamic Jihad in the global sense, all trying to infiltrate Israel. This is where it all happens, right here in northern Samaria." But perhaps the most shocking revelation wasn't about the terrorists. It was about the international institutions that should have been protecting innocent people, but instead enabled industrial-scale terror operations. A former intelligence officer, name again protected, and I quote, said, "The UN supports terrorism and rogue regimes. Since the 1990s, the UN has stopped serving its mandates and began servicing Islamist terror groups and their planners and money sources in Iran and Qatar. UNRWA, that's UNRWA, facilities weren't just being used by terrorists, they were integral to the terror network's operations." The journalist in the field reported, and I quote, "What the terrorists did on October 7, 2023, they've been doing for decades, just smaller, less public attacks, both on Israel and their own peoples. And the UN knew. They had to know." So getting back to my commentary on this, the United Nations knew. The refugee status that should have been temporary under international law had been maintained for over 75 years, not to help genuine refugees, but to provide permanent cover for terrorist operations. Please note that 75 years ago, there were about 700,000 of these so-called self-acclaimed Palestinians. The ones today can't really claim to be refugees, can they? According to a legal expert in international law, and I quote, "Under normal international law, refugee status is temporary. The fact that these camps have maintained special status for 3 generations isn't humanitarian aid. It's institutionalized terror protection." As our investigation continues in the coming episodes, we'll expose how deep this conspiracy goes. We'll reveal recorded conversations of terror supporters admitting their true genocidal agenda. We'll show you documents providing the Palestinian identity was created as a political weapon. You heard me, a political weapon. We'll play you interviews where Islamic leaders openly discuss using Palestinian suffering as a tool for religious conversion. But today we leave you with this evidence from Jenin. Terrorism isn't hiding in the shadows. It's operating in plain sight, protected by international institutions that have abandoned their founding principles. And I quote this: the UN has abandoned their founding principles. The IDF and the people of Israel are fighting for what's good, for what is right, against an evil that exists not just within their borders, but one that is systematically exported to threaten the entire civilized world. The mosque floors covered with shell casings, the children trained to kill, the industrial weapons manufacturing, the detailed massacre plans, the UN facilities used as terror headquarters. This isn't happening in some distant war zone that doesn't affect you. The same networks, the same funding, the same ideological hatred that turned a refugee camp into a terror factory, it's spreading to your communities, your universities, your streets. Think about it if you're in Canada. Universities with Palestinian students talking behind the scenes. Pro-Palestinian marches calling for hatred, calling for genocide in your streets. In our next episode, we'll travel from the battlefields of Jenin to the television studios of the Middle East, where Arab voices speaking to Arab audiences are telling truths about the Palestinian movement that will shock you. We'll hear from a Saudi man who completely destroys the Palestinian historical narrative, speaking on a Muslim television network to a Muslim audience. His words will challenge everything you think you know about this conflict. Until then, ask yourself this: if international institutions can enable industrial-scale terrorism in refugee camps, what else are they hiding? What other uncomfortable truths have been systemically and systematically covered up? The truth is out there, people. The evidence is overwhelming. The question is, are you ready to face it? This has been Global Perspectives. I'm Andrea McGurran with KHTY TV and News. Please like, subscribe, and share this episode. The truth must be told, and justice must prevail. And remember, when evil is operating in plain sight, silence isn't neutrality, it's complicity.